The sun was shining bright over the little frontier town of Cedar Creek. It was one of those warm Sunday mornings when even the wind seemed gentle. The sky stretched wide and endless above the dusty main street. Wooden houses lined both sides of the road, their windows open to let the air pass through. Horses stood quietly outside the general store, swishing their tails. The town was peaceful, but that peace was about to be tested in a way no one expected. At the center of town stood a small white church. It was not fancy, but people treated it like the heart of their world. Its wooden cross stood high, shining softly in the sun. Every Sunday, bells rang out across the town, calling people to gather. Men came in their clean shirts, women in their best dresses, and children held hands skipping along the path. It was a day for prayer, songs, and quiet reflection. Inside, the church smelled of polished wood and wildflowers. Rows of benches were filled with people who had known each other all their lives. They whispered to one another, smiled politely, and waited for the bishop to start the service. Among them sat Tom McAllister. He was not the kind of man who liked attention. He wore a brown hat, slightly tilted forward, and a clean white shirt tucked neatly into his jeans. His boots were worn but polished. Tom had lived in Cedar Creek for 5 years, working on a ranch outside town. He wasn't loud or boastful. In fact, many people said they hardly heard more than a few words from him on most days. But everyone respected him. He had a steady way of moving, of speaking, of looking at people. He was the kind of man who didn't need to prove anything. Tom sat near the back, his hat resting on his knees. He wasn't really there for the sermon. His mind was on something else. Something bigger. His heart beat slowly but firmly, like the ticking of a clock. At the front of the church stood Bishop Clarence Whitmore. The bishop was a kind, elderly man with silver hair and glasses that always slid down his nose. He had been serving the people of Cedar Creek for more than 20 years. Everyone trusted him. He raised his hands to quiet the crowd. "Good morning," he said gently. "Good morning," the crowd replied. Just as he was about to begin his sermon, something unexpected happened. The heavy wooden doors of the church opened with a creak. Sunlight flooded in and everyone turned to look. In that bright light stood Evelyn Turner, her white lace veil glowing softly. She walked in slowly, every step light but sure. Her heart was beating fast, but her chin was lifted high. Evelyn was the daughter of Charles Turner, one of the richest ranch owners in the region. Everyone in town knew her. She grew up with manners and a smile, but people had always seen her as fragile, like a porcelain doll. Today, however, she did not look fragile. She looked determined. Evelyn's father had arranged for her to marry Andrew Keller, a wealthy land baron from another town. It was supposed to be a big wedding with music, decorations, and business promises. To most people, it looked like a smart match. But Evelyn had never smiled about it. She had always wanted a different kind of life, a life where she could choose for herself. When she walked into that church, whispers began to rise like waves. "What is she doing here?" someone whispered. "Isn't the wedding supposed to be next week?" another said. "She looks different," someone else added. Tom slowly rose from the bench. He didn't rush. His movements were calm, like a man who had made up his mind long ago. As he walked down the aisle, every pair of eyes followed him. The soft creak of his boots on the wooden floor echoed in the quiet church. Evelyn met his eyes. For a moment, the world outside disappeared. It was just the two of them, standing on the edge of something that would change their lives. Evelyn's father, Charles Turner, was sitting near the front. His jaw tightened when he saw Tom. He had never liked cowboys much, and he especially didn't like the idea of his daughter being anywhere near one. Tom represented everything simple and honest, and Charles had always chased power and control. "Tom McAllister," Charles said sharply, rising from his seat. "What's the meaning of this?" But Tom didn't look at him. He kept walking toward the front, where Bishop Whitmore stood frozen, unsure of what was happening. The air inside the church grew thick with tension. Children stopped fidgeting. Women held their breath. Even the old wooden clock on the wall seemed to tick louder than usual. Tom reached the altar and turned toward the crowd. His face was calm. His eyes were steady. Evelyn stood beside him now, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Then, with a voice that wasn't loud but carried through the entire church, Tom spoke. "She's my wife now." For a split second, no one moved. The words hung in the air like a bell that had just been struck. The bishop's hand trembled, and the staff he had been holding slipped from his fingers. It fell to the floor with a sharp sound that echoed through the silent church. The whispers turned into gasps. What did he say? Wife? Did I hear that right? Charles Turner's face went pale. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Evelyn finally lifted her chin higher. Her voice was soft but strong. It's true, she said. Tom and I were married last night. It was a simple sentence, but it hit the crowd like a wave. The people of Cedar Creek weren't used to surprises. Life in the town moved slowly and steadily, like a wagon rolling down a flat road. But in that moment, everything felt different. The air was charged with something new. Bishop Whitmore stared at Tom and Evelyn, his glasses slipping further down his nose. You did what? He asked, still in shock. We married? Tom repeated calmly. It's done. She chose me. Evelyn nodded. I did. It's what I want. The crowd broke into small murmurs. Some people smiled secretly, as if they liked what they were seeing. Others shook their heads, worried about what Charles Turner might do. But no one could look away. Evelyn's decision wasn't just about love. It was about freedom. She had spent her whole life doing what others told her to do, what to wear, how to speak, who to meet. But last night, under the soft light of the stars, she had made the first choice that was truly hers. She and Tom had stood together by the old oak tree outside town, and a traveling preacher had married them in the quiet night. Tom had promised her nothing fancy, just honesty, respect, and a shared life. And for Evelyn, that was worth more than all the gold her father's ranch could buy. Inside the church, her father finally found his voice. Evelyn Turner, he said slowly, his tone cold. Do you understand what you've done? Yes, Father, she said. For the first time in my life, I understand exactly what I've done. Charles turned his gaze to Tom, his jaw set like stone. And you, he said. You've made a mistake, boy. Tom didn't respond with anger. He simply met his gaze, steady and unshaken. I didn't take anything that wasn't freely given, he said. The bishop took a deep breath. He was a man who had seen many things, weddings, funerals, births, heartbreaks. But this was different. He looked at the young couple before him, then at the crowd waiting for him to speak. He wasn't sure what to say. One thing was clear, this wasn't just a love story. It was a storm, and it had just begun. Outside, the sound of the wind moved through the trees like a soft song. Life in Cedar Creek continued. Horses shifted their weight, a wagon rolled down the main road. But inside that little white church, the world had changed. Tom and Evelyn stood side by side. Their hands were not touching, but they didn't need to. Their decision had already tied them together in a way that no one could undo. People would remember that moment for years to come. Not because it was loud or wild, but because it was quiet and brave. A cowboy had spoken just 5 simple words, and nothing in Cedar Creek would ever be the same again. The sound of the bishop's staff hitting the floor still echoed in the quiet church. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Everyone just stared at Tom and Evelyn as if the world had turned. Upside down right in front of their eyes, Evelyn stood tall beside Tom. Her veil shimmered softly in the sunlight coming through the stained glass windows. Tom's shoulders were straight, his face calm, his eyes steady. The whispers around them grew louder, like the soft buzzing of bees. No one could believe what they had just heard. The bishop cleared his throat softly and picked up his staff with trembling hands. His heart was still racing, but he tried to steady his voice. Thomas McAllister, he said slowly. Evelyn Turner. Are you truly married? Tom nodded once. Yes, Bishop. Last night. It was real. It's done. Evelyn spoke too. Her voice didn't shake this time. It was my choice. No one forced me. I wanted it. Her father, Charles Turner, was still sitting on the front bench. His hands were gripping his hat so tightly that his knuckles had turned pale. He wasn't used to losing control of a situation. In this town, his word usually carried weight. But now in front of everyone, his daughter had chosen a different path. Evelyn, he said finally, his voice low but clear. You have no idea what you're doing. Evelyn turned toward him. Her face was calm. Yes, Father, I do. For the first time, I truly do. The people in the church looked from one to another. Some of them were shocked. Some were smiling quietly as if secretly rooting for the couple. Others just sat frozen, waiting to see what would happen next. The bishop looked at the young couple again. You both understand, he said carefully, that what you've done cannot be undone easily. Marriage is a promise before God and people. Tom met his eyes without fear. I understand. And I mean every word of it. Evelyn nodded. So do I. The bishop took a deep breath and let it out slowly. He had married many couples in his time, but never like this. This was not a planned ceremony with flowers and music. It was something stronger, two hearts choosing their own path in front of everyone. Finally, the bishop placed his staff down gently and raised his hand in blessing. His voice, now calm and warm, filled the room. Then it is done, he said softly. May your union be blessed, and may you both have the strength to walk the road ahead. The church grew silent again. But it wasn't the same silence as before. This time it was full of energy, full of a kind of quiet wonder. People didn't quite know how to react. Evelyn's father stood up slowly. His eyes met Tom's. There was no anger in them now, only the weight of disappointment and the shock of losing control. He straightened his jacket and said, You may have surprised everyone today, but life isn't as easy as a Sunday morning, boy. You will need to prove you can take care of her. Tom nodded, his voice steady. I will. I already have a plan. I've never made a promise I couldn't keep. Evelyn stepped closer to Tom, her presence soft but strong. It wasn't just love that held them together. It was trust. She had chosen him not because of wealth or power, but because she believed in the kind of man he was. The bishop slowly walked down the steps and stood in front of the couple. He placed his hand lightly on Evelyn's shoulder. You have made a brave choice, my dear, he said gently. Brave choices often lead to difficult paths, but they also lead to real stories, the kind that people remember. Evelyn smiled softly. I'm ready for that. People began to rise from the benches. The church was no longer still. Some came forward to offer quiet words to the couple. Mrs. Hale, the baker's wife, whispered, I always knew you had a strong heart, Evelyn. Tom shook hands with a few men from town who respected him. Others simply nodded silently, their faces showing both surprise and respect. Not everyone was happy, though. A few people whispered behind their hands, talking about how unusual this was. But even they couldn't deny that something big had happened, a moment that would be talked about for years. Outside, the sun was still shining, and a soft breeze moved through the trees. It was as if the world hadn't changed, but for Tom and Evelyn everything had. As they stepped out of the church together side by side, the sound of their boots on the wooden steps echoed in the warm air. Evelyn felt the breeze on her face and closed her eyes for a second. It felt like freedom. Tom glanced at her and gave a small smile. Are you ready? He asked. Yes, she said. More than ever. Down the street, people stopped what they were doing to watch them walk. The general store owner leaned on the doorframe. A group of children pointed and whispered excitedly. The town had seen weddings before, but never like this. Never so unexpected, never so real. They walked toward Tom's small ranch at the edge of town. It wasn't a big house like her father's mansion. It was a simple wooden cabin surrounded by wide-open land, wildflowers, and the soft sound of wind moving through the grass. It didn't shine like gold, but it felt honest. As they reached the porch, Evelyn paused. She looked at the sky, at the land stretching far and wide, and at Tom standing beside her. She felt something new, a sense of belonging. I've never been this far from my father's house without someone following me, she admitted softly. Tom looked at her kindly. Well, he said, you're not being followed anymore. You're walking beside someone now. Evelyn smiled. It wasn't the polite smile she had learned to wear at fancy gatherings. It was a real smile, the kind that came from the heart. That evening, Tom lit the lantern inside the cabin. It filled the room with warm golden light. The walls were plain, but everything was clean and cared for. Evelyn ran her hand gently over the wooden table. It wasn't made for show. It was made for living. Tom brought her a simple cup of tea. It's not much, he said, but it's real. Evelyn took the cup and held it in both hands. It's perfect, she replied. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she had to be someone else. She didn't have to wear a perfect smile or follow someone else's plan. She could breathe. Meanwhile, back in town, the story was spreading fast. By sunset, everyone in Cedar Creek knew that Evelyn Turner had married Tom McAllister without a grand wedding or her father's permission. Some called it foolish. Others called it brave, but everyone agreed they would remember this day. Charles Turner sat alone in his study, staring out the window at the fading light. His heart was heavy. He had wanted the best for his daughter in his own way, but he realized now that he had never asked her what she truly wanted. A part of him felt proud of her courage, though he didn't say it aloud. Back at the cabin, Evelyn stood on the porch looking at the stars. Tom joined her, standing quietly beside her. Neither of them needed to speak. The night sky stretched above them like a promise. "Do you regret it?" Tom asked softly. Evelyn turned to him, her eyes shining. "Not even for a second." Tom smiled a little. "Then I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never do." The wind rustled the grass, and the world around them seemed to slow down. For years, Evelyn had lived in a world built by others. But tonight, for the first time, she was standing in a world she had chosen. Days turned into weeks. Life wasn't always easy. The cabin needed work, the land needed care, and the world outside didn't always approve. But through it all, Tom and Evelyn stood together. Evelyn learned how to cook on the old stove, feed the horses, and care for the garden. She laughed more than she ever had before. Tom, who had spent so many years alone, found his quiet life filled with warmth and laughter. Slowly, people in town began to accept their union. The whispers turned into nods of respect. Even Evelyn's father, after some time, rode out to the ranch one day. He didn't say much, but when he saw his daughter smiling genuinely, he knew she had made the right choice for herself. Their love story didn't need a grand ballroom or golden rings. It was built on quiet promises, shared dreams, and the strength to stand up for what they believed in. Years later, people still talked about that Sunday morning when the church fell silent. When the bishop dropped his staff in shock and when a cowboy stood up and calmly said, "She's my wife now." They talked about Evelyn's courage, Tom's quiet strength, and the day Cedar Creek learned that sometimes the bravest act is simply choosing love on your own terms. And under the same wide sky where it all began, their story continued, steady, simple, and true.